Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very excited to welcome you to this webinar, Navigating Uncertainty with FP&A Scenario Management. I'm so happy to say we got 396 registrants from 57 countries in the world. I'm always amazed to see how we, as a globe, we can bring our profession and thought leadership to the next level. So really looking forward to a fantastic hour with all of you. And I thank my panel and I thank all of you for attending. Okay, so our agenda for today, we're going to talk about how do we move from traditional planning that we've probably all seen and maybe are still involved with to scenario management, really at the cutting edge. And Larissa Melnichuk, the CEO of FP&A Trends, recently traveled around the globe, and this was the #1 topic that rose to the table, right? So everybody's thinking about it, and it's relevant, and we need to do it. We're then going to go through a couple of industries. We're going to go through the banking industry, the fast-paced retail industry. And what's going to be a common theme in this is it's a journey. We're all at different parts of the journey within our organizations, and it's about how do we keep moving forward, right? It's really encouraging to see even two massive companies and top-tier companies that we're going to talk about are very much still on the journey. We're then going to talk about how technology can be a massive enabler. It's about how do we leverage new technology or existing technology to move our departments and organizations forward. And importantly, we'll go through some conclusions, recommendations, and a Q&A. And we really invite you to put questions in the chat. And what we're going to do is we are going to monitor the chat and we're going to ask the questions that rise up to the top. If there's a lot of common themes, we're going to ensure we get that to you. And if there's any unanswered questions, we commit to providing answers to you. Okay, I'm going to ask my amazing panel to come on camera. Okay, welcome. So I'm going to start with Vikram Goal. So Vikram Goal, currently working for Royal Bank in Canada, a leading financial institution in Canada and around the globe. He has a team worldwide, and he also has responsibility for several areas within Royal Bank. Welcome, Vikram. Awesome. Next, we have Guyan Rishting, currently the VP of Finance at Walmart. He's worked in many parts of the world and has also worked in different industries. So really love the global context and the thought leadership he brings to the table. Welcome, Guyan.
Thank you very much, Ron, and thanks for having me.
Amazing. Okay, and last but not least, we got Steve Mosley. He's living in Florida, so the weather's a little better there than where we are. And a fun fact about Steve is he travels around in his recreational vehicle around the country, so I'm really jealous of that. But Steve has 25 years of amazing experience here. So it's really about thought leadership and that last part around how can technology really help us navigate. Steve, welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Looking forward to today.
Fantastic. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panel to join me when they have their respective sections. So thank you, folks. And first want to thank Unit 4 for sponsoring this webinar. Really appreciate that. The FP&A Trends Group, a little bit about that. And I continue to be amazed when I talk to Larissa. 27 cities, 16 countries, 4 continents and growing. So this is really about, as a globe, how can we take our FP&A profession to the next level? And the FP&A Trends provides a wonderful forum to do that. There's lots of education available, online resources, workshops, Board Connect projects. There's an ebook as well as an FP&A digest. So lots of different ways to learn and help us grow. And last but not least, strategic advisory and research, right? And it's all about being on the cutting edge of where are we going? How can we take best practices and bring them to our respective organizations? So artificial intelligence, machine learning. And I'll share one snippet of the survey that was done. And the beauty of that survey, it was 2020. So it's very recent time, really timely to help us make great decisions for our respective departments and organizations. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping. So we've got a 1-hour webinar. We've got 2 polls coming up. I really invite you to vote in the polls. The Q&A I mentioned, so the Q&A adds tremendous value towards the end of the webinar, and we will make the presentation available on handouts along with the recording. Okay, last but not least on this, the survey that we send out that we have, we really appreciate you completing it. It's really about how can we continue to improve these webinars to ensure it provides as much value as possible for every single one of you on the call. So really appreciate you completing the survey. Okay, a little bit about my experience just before we get to our amazing panel. So I spent almost 20 years in finance and FP&A roles, and so this topic is near and dear to me. I think if I rewind and say, if I had some of this approach in my thinking and in the systems we had, I would have been much more an effective FP&A individual, and it would be right at the forefront of the business, which I think is really the goal. Okay, and I really like this analogy because I think it's two ends of the spectrum, right? So it's about, hey, how do we take FP&A and move ourselves to the right side of this page? I've often been in that situation where a leader has asked me for, hey, can you quickly run this scenario or scenarios? And I've had to say, can I get back to you, right? So it's almost like stopping down the boat, slowing down the boat, whatever that part of the reference is. But I love the vision of, hey, how can we be that sail helping guide the organization through these uncertain times? Think about inflation, supply chain, black swan events, all these things going on. And it's about how do we help the organization make real-time decision making, right? So think about speed, think about having the tools to enable great business decision across the organization. And the world's changing faster than ever, right? I mentioned the inflation, the black swan events, supply chain issues, and it seems unending, and it seems to be becoming faster than ever. For me personally, I worked at a toilet paper and paper towel company, fantastic company, but we were probably very early in this journey. We're very much on that traditional side, and we actually spent about 4 months building a budget in 2019. And think about March 2020 in Toronto is when the first wave of the pandemic hit, and the budget was essentially obsolete overnight. And so it's about like, how do we ensure we don't have that non-value added time committed to these amazing finance individuals and teams and shift it to how do we use scenario management in real time? And scenario management is not about, hey, let's just do the best, medium, and worst case. It's about how do we have scenarios that are live that we can look at, hey, what's the foreign exchange rate? What's the inflation rate? What else is going on? And make decisions, right? Rather than an old traditional, high, medium, low, or best case, worst case. So what does it entail, right? It entails wherever you are on this spectrum, moving towards the right side of this page, right? So from a time frame, going from an annual, very traditional cycle to a rolling planning cycle. So much more nimble, going from disconnected financial and operational models to, hey, we've got connection across the organization to make great decisions. Going from negotiated forecast to driver-based forecast, understanding what are the most important drivers and how can we watch them in real time. Going from modeling by strategic objectives to driver-based forecast, right? Again, by constant driver evaluation, right? So not one time and having a locked Excel spreadsheet, for example. No, it's how do we have it live? Going from manual Excel consolidation tools, I've been there, to advanced automated and analytical systems. Going from the duration of 1 to 6 months for forecast scenarios, things like that, to hours. Think about the power of having a scenario turned around in hours, right? The value of that is tremendous. Going from a single financial plan that's very kind of linear to multiple scenarios to enable decision making. Think about, inflation's one that's come up a lot, and I know companies that maybe have in our market priced 4 times in a given year when they're traditionally pricing maximum once a year. Okay, so here's a survey I mentioned. So think about only 6% of respondents can run scenarios in real time. Only 13% can run it in less than 1 day. So that's saying less than 1 in 5 or less than 20% can run it in less than 1 day cumulatively. So for me, glass half full, we have a tremendous opportunity to move forward. So this is just part of the amazing survey that was done to show where we are. And it's very important to understand where we are to help us know where to go. And last but not least, so how do we get there? So how do we bring people along? How do we develop processes that are going to enable this? How do we leverage existing technology bring on new technology and show the return on investment for it? How do we communicate it across the organization and take a real leadership approach as we move forward? Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Vikram, and what's amazing is he's going to share his example of Royal Bank and how he's navigated this particular journey. Thank you, Vikram. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Larissa, for inviting me to this panel. And good day to folks around the world and my fellow panelists as well. As Ron mentioned, I will briefly talk about the impact from extreme volatility in the financial services industry and how we have pivoted and progressed on our journey to be more nimble and dynamic as it relates to planning, forecasting, and moving to scenario management. On the following slide is just a brief overview of RBC, what I'd call RBC at a glance. So we are the largest Canadian bank from a market capitalization perspective. Through our diversified business model, we provide advice and financial products to over 17 million clients worldwide in a highly regulated industry. And we have a track record of strong performance with 9% earnings growth over the last 5 years. Wealth management is the business I support, and we are a leader in asset management and high net services in Canada, and also a top 10 full service brokerage in the US as well. So you can imagine a bank's revenue is impacted by both macroeconomic factors such as interest rates, financial market, equity, bond indices, and also changing consumer behavior as a result of that. To put things into perspective, if we move to the next slide, you will see the extreme volatility observed over the past few years. In particular, Ron mentioned the March-April timeframe of 2020 when the pandemic was, just breaking out and everybody was sort of reacting to it. We had some very pronounced declines in the stock markets. Along the same lines, most central banks floored the interest rates, and only recently we're seeing the rates now rise back again. An interesting point to note that during the pandemic, the first year of the pandemic, Canadian households and businesses were sitting on over 200 billion in excess cash in the form of deposits, a lot of that with the banks itself. So all this volatility required adjusting business models for the bank, and also changing pricing structures, but while continuing to maintain and grow our profitability, and at the same time provide the financial advice that our clients seek from us. If we move to the next slide, you'll see our historical approach had been a heavy reliance on the annual plan and the 5-year strategic outlook models. And we also did twice a year, 18-month forward outlooks. Those are still done within the bank. These are important documents, they're boarded documents, so we still perform them. But at the same time, to provide the business executives with real-time information, we have evolved towards doing several estimates during a financial quarter that rely on scenario management. And needless to say, the cycle time for that is much faster, much more compressed. If we move to the next slide, please. I think the first and maybe most important aspect of the how from a scenario management perspective is to get the management buy-in along with the different stakeholders, because essentially this will require changing behavior and at the same time some of your processes as well. Secondly, for an organization our size, it's very important to have an end-to-end perspective, especially within business segments or divisions that are interrelated. So an impact to wealth management can have a different impact to, for example, our branch banking network. So we have to think through comprehensively. And related to that, what we do try to do is make sure some of our scenarios are well documented and they have enough detail in them so that we can put together some of the models based on the details that are available. It's also critical to establish partnerships with business. We rely on real-time business data to drive our models. And a lot of that business data is available with our businesses. So initially, it took us quite some time to sort of build the pipe into the business data, so that in the form of data lakes or data warehouses, so that we can utilize that information. I would also add, we continuously enhance our models by back testing them. So essentially, when the results are in, when the actual scenario is played out, we do look at, did the model sort of stand the test of what we were expecting out of it? Again, back to Ron's point, it's a constant evolution. It's a journey we've been on. So refining those models is fairly critical. And final point I would add is we are also hiring more people with data skill sets. As you would expect in a financial services industry, really the reliance has always been on bringing in people who are certified chartered accountants, CFAs, but gradually we have evolved towards bringing in talent that has more data skills and can, sort of navigate through complex data in a timely manner. On the next slide, what you will see is sort of the value from my standpoint that scenario management brings to the organization. So without, Phil, I think the most critical value is the timely and valuable information in which they can make decisions in a real-time basis. And finance is at the table to help make that available. I would say, to give you an example, our CFO has earnings calls in which the results of the bank are announced. And just recently, we were called upon to run a couple of scenarios almost in real time, right before the earnings call. And we were able to provide that information to our CFO, which enabled for some good, solid discussions with our analysts during the call. And finally, I would say as a finance function, it is fairly satisfying that you are involved in value creation and enabling decision support. And that is also always perceived by our business partners as being something they find very useful. With that, Ron, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vikram. That was very insightful. And for me, a couple of things stood out. A very traditional organization like Royal Bank really moving forward. And I love the fact that you said you were called upon for real-time decision making, and your team was able to deliver on that. So really cool to see you guys moving forward and a very traditional organization, as I know it, making great progress. Thank you, Vikram. So what we're going to do now, folks, is we're going to go through the first poll and really encourage you to vote. And I'm launching the poll right now. And so the poll, what is the best description of your current forecasting process? Is it traditional forecasting based on accounting period? Is it a rolling forecast? Is it a hybrid forecast with a bit of both? Or do you have no forecasting process? Okay, and I'll leave the poll open for a few seconds. Thank you very much. I'm seeing the results come in. Excellent. Okay, perfect. I think it's settled in. So I'm going to share the poll results. Fantastic. And I'm going to ask my panel to join me, please. Good stuff. And I'm just going to ask for a really quick comment, Vikram, on what you're seeing here.
I think it's in line with my expectations, Ron. If you were to ask me, I would say we're also in the hybrid mode. And it is good to see that it is way up there, 40%, in terms of having both a traditional and rolling forecast. I would say maybe 6 months from now or maybe a year, I would expect that percentage to grow probably compared to that traditional forecast even more.
Okay, amazing. And I'll call on the rest of the panelists in a second. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a quick discussion, right? So what we want to do is, if you don't mind joining me on camera, folks, is the journey towards real-time scenario management can seem perfect. The journey towards real-time scenario management can seem overwhelming. How do you keep your organizations motivated and on track in this really dynamic, ever-changing environment? And Vikram, I'll ask you again. What do you think?
I think the most critical aspect of this, Ron, is to be able to demonstrate the value proposition from it. And I think, as I mentioned, the ask for a real-time information on an analyst call is an example. The more, as a finance function, we can continue to demonstrate that partnership with the business and the benefit the business is getting out of this, I think will keep the organization involved in this.
Okay, amazing. Guyan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. To me, the level effort should not discourage the need to do it. So if I would be provocative, I would say you're not in the mood, like you get in the mood. You get that organization in the mood, because somewhat it has become even more critical today than it was maybe a couple of years ago due to the volatility of the environment.
Amazing. I love that provocative approach. It's, hey, get in the mood because we got to do it. And Steve, how about you?
I think there's an element of what's in it for me, and to Vikram's point about value, if you're providing value to the managers at different levels of the organization and they can see the real benefit, then they will keep moving and they will stay in the mood, to Guyan's point.
Okay, amazing. And just to recap the survey, 36% of folks said there was traditional forecast, 21% said rolling. As Vikram said, the good news, 40% are in a hybrid, and 3% no forecasting process. So how do we get more and more of us to that rolling and keep moving down the journey? Okay, Vikram, Steve, thank you very much. I'll call on you in a minute. And now I'm gonna turn it over to Guyan, who's definitely in the mood to talk about Walmart and how his organization has moved forward with this.
Thanks, Ron. If I just start by giving a simple intro to a couple of data points to Walmart, if you don't mind just sharing for the group. Just, Walmart is as you know, a huge company. Ron, are you able to share the material with the group so that they can see a couple of data points for Canada? If not, I can speak to it, that's fine. We have more than 100,000 associates for the company. And to give you a sense of our network, more than 60% of Canadian households live within 10 minutes of a Walmart store. We're a significant contributor to donation, to charities, organization. And as you may suspect, we've got millions of items to shop for, whether it's online or in store. So to make it simple, for those that live in Canada, now is the time to go and shop with us, whatever means is most useful for you. But more seriously, I think for me, there are three things that are important. Is one, we're omni-channel. So we operate both online, in store, and try to provide a seamless experience to our customers. The second one is we're a one-stop shop. So we have, if you think about it, we've got categories that are long lead time. Think about bike, barbecue, apparel, but also the one that you might shop on a weekly basis. Fresh items, your grocery, your consumables. And we also have a health and wellness business where we've got pharmacists and pharmacy, which, as you may suspect, during COVID was really critical. So we operate in a very fast pace and dynamic environment. And to build upon Ron's introduction, plus Vikram, anything that is happening in the society and throughout the economy, retail is maybe front-facing it the fastest. If we then think on the next slide about what does that mean somewhat for scenario planning for us as a retailer? Well, for us, it's almost a survival kit, like it's a must-have. And we cannot be reactive. It's something that we need to be as good as we can to be really proactive. The reason are the following is any changes in assumption, and I will speak to for finance what type of assumption we're mentioning, but any change of assumption have huge impact to how we operate and execute our tactics, but also strategy. So think about how we operate. If we, for example, change an assumption on how customers are going to shop with us, whether it's more online or more in store, and pandemic was the best example, then it will have a huge impact in terms of how many associates do we want to have in our store available to be able to provide a seamless experience. It will also impact how we want to flow goods. How much can we flow domestic versus international? But also, if you think a bit longer term, the changes that we're seeing for now in the inflationary environment could have impact on category management. What are the categories that we feel are going to be most successful and relevant to people when they're under financial constraint? Store format. Do we feel about having larger assortment in our store, smaller store, different partnership within the store, but also potentially partnership in most of our businesses? So being able to pressure test some assumption, whether those would be external or internal, has huge impact. And for a company like us, we're talking multi-million, multi-billion Canadian dollars impact. And if we move to the next slide, you might say, okay, so why finance and how does that relate to us? Well, we are still a bit traditional in the sense that our financial processes, given the size of the company, are both long range over the next 5-year horizon, yearly on the yearly budget, but we also do monthly rolling forecasts. And then we do ad hoc forecasts that can sometimes even be weekly, depending how things are evolving. And I think what I would like to insist is across each of that timeline horizon, scenario management and planning is relevant. If it's over a 5-year horizon, we would pressure test assumption on market growth, competitor entrance, channel shift toward more e-commerce as an example to make the simplest. And we would look at, given those changes, how is that impacting our business and how should we in the end react to make the best decision? At the opposite of the spectrum, on a weekly basis, we also do the same, where we live in a world where we've got many competitors and we all compete to drive traffic in our store and provide the best product at the lowest price for our customers. So when we see, for example, the price of potatoes, of banana or something else, or diapers that is dropping through a promotion from a competitor, how do we react? And what's the impact to our financials? And again, to the operation and the execution across the company. So if we flip to my final slide, I just want to highlight as a finance team, we play a very critical role there, which is we're maybe the only group in the company that has a holistic and an end-to-end visibility of those scenarios' impact to the company and how it will impact the financials. The way we approach it is actually twofold. The first one is we start usually with top-down pressure testing assumption, and we try to find those that are the most relevant depending on the timeline that I discussed earlier. And when we align on a couple, then we pressure test and go a bit more into details with a smaller group that is then being refined by a broader group. So I wouldn't be able to tell you that we've got a rigid process where we do scenario management this way, that day of the month, that process and that deliverable. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Agility is king, and that means that in the current volatile environment, everything can be considered an assumption that will have an impact to how we operate. So I think for us, the biggest challenge is to be selective on the variable and assumption we want to play with to get the outcome, more than it is to have a standard process. It still means that from a system perspective, though we want to be agile, definitely we are on a journey to still be able to put this in a more, I would say, not rigorous, but more standard and processed way, so that we've got better capability of anticipating long-term impacts through standard model rather than being very, very agile. But the key message for me is really, this is a must-have, an enabler to make the right decision more than it is a financial process in the background. Those were my key comment, Ron. So over to you.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, and Guyan, I really like how you said it's a must-have, it's an enabler, it enables decision-making. I think that's where it's all about, right? And I love how you said agility is king, and it's not just a standard clockwork type approach. We need to be agile and nimble in order to help the business. And you mentioned prices going up and down. I mainly see them going up, but I think it's really important to say, hey, what are my competitors doing? How can I make decisions in real time? And think about the power of a FP&A or finance team when you're ahead of the game and you're helping make those decisions. I think that's a wonderful example. And another example of a massive organization that's really made some real positive strides. And as Guyan said, look, we still continue to move on that journey. Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to now move on to the next poll, folks. So I really appreciate your participation in the previous one. And I'm going to launch the second poll. So the second poll, what is the best description of scenario management in your organization? Is it A, scenarios are run in real time? B, scenarios are run in less than 1 day? 3, we run scenarios, but they're very time consuming. I definitely identify with that. And last but not least, we're unable to run scenarios. And I'll keep the poll open. I'm very curious to see if this lines up with the 22 FP&A Trends survey results. So far, it seems to be trending that way. And I'll just give it a couple of seconds to settle. Okay, fantastic. I'm gonna close the poll now. And as you can see, what we have for the survey, for the poll, is we have 10% in real time, 16% or less run in less than 1 day. And if you recall from my previous slides there, we were under 20. So this says this group is at 26%, so definitely some progress, which, as I said, is where we want to go. 56 can run scenarios, but time consuming. That's where most of my organizations were, and 18% are unable to run scenarios. So I think wherever you are, think about how can we improve that. So I'm going to invite my panel to join me. Amazing, and I'll just switch the order here. So so maybe I'll ask Steve, what do you think of this, and what's your quick comment on it?
It's not surprising, the responses we got. Scenario management, unless you have the technology to support it, can be very, very time consuming. Okay, amazing. Guyan, what do you think?
I think this is, I would tend to agree. It's consistent with how we would think about it, but what I found interesting is it is time consuming, but to me, really the key question is it driving the right outcome? Because if the answer is yes, maybe the time we're spending on those scenario management is actually valuable time, and value creation should be really top of our mind, though it's making time. So I like your challenge, Ron. How could we be faster? But yes, it takes time for sure.
Amazing, and I think you've hit on the key point, value creation as an organization. How can we help our organizations get there? Amazing, thank you all for participating. And I'm gonna move on to a quick discussion, right? And it's around, hey, how do you gain leadership buy-in and show the ROI for these massive projects and maybe investments that we need to make? And maybe Steve will ask you to start on that.
I think the overriding goal is for linking strategy and execution. So we have the leadership that are determining the strategy, and we need to be able to provide that support so that they can test those strategies against different simulations.
Okay, awesome. Vikram.
I'd agree with Steve, and I'd also add, Ron, it comes back to the value proposition for the business. I think at the end of the day, funding is constrained in all organizations. So management has to choose where to sort of invest, especially if it's a new tool, new system, new process. By demonstrating the value of something like this, I think that's probably the best approach here.
Okay, amazing. Guyan?
Yeah, just to build on Vikram's last point, I think to me, focusing on really the outcome is critical, because if the outcome for those type of exercise should almost self-justify the funding more easily than for others. When you're replacing an ERP, some of us have been there. It's difficult to find the right business case to drive adoption across the company. I think with scenario management and investment there and time there, if the outcome enables faster, stronger, better value creation decision-making, we've got the right platform. So how could we explore and pressure test the outcome at best as we can?
Amazing, amazing. Thank you all. Vikram, Guyan, thank you very much. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to Steve, right? So Steve has, as we mentioned, fantastic experience, and the floor is yours, Steve.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody, wherever you are. So yeah, my name's Steve Mosley, and FP&A is definitely one of my passions. So if you can start with the next slide, please. And what I'd like to do, first of all, is talk about how FP&A is done today, generally. And every organization has departments such as these. Some could have more, a few could have less. And the process of budgeting, and we'll start with the budget process. We send out templates. So if you can click on the next slide, please. So we send out Excel templates to all these departments. These templates, there could be 10 templates with 50 tabs or 50 templates with 10 tabs. But regardless, there's an awful lot of Excel worksheets out there. And to make it worse, each department could have their own personal spreadsheet where they do calculations for maybe for travel, for conferences. So that gives rise to, and if we look at some of the some of the issues that we come across on the next one, if you look at how do we get actuals into those templates, it's extremely resource intensive, and it has to be done on a regular basis. And the ability or inability to do this, can provide a lack of clarity, and certainly no accountability, and especially with these spreadsheets that are, if you like, off to the side. Now, versioning, I mean, this is a massive issue when it comes to spreadsheets. How would you version a spreadsheet? So you have a file name, you may put version 1, version 2, you may then give it a date, you may then give it initials after the date. And then when you have to consolidate all of this, the first question is, am I picking up the right spreadsheet? Am I picking up the correct version? It's very disjointed, and it's also very, very silo-based. Again, until everything is consolidated, and then perhaps only the CFO can see the results, nobody can see a holistic view of the organization. And then security, you can apply security, at fold levels, etc., but not at the data level. It's not easy in Excel to say this user can't see this department, this user can't see this general ledger account, and so on. All of this, rolls up to a lack of trust. Can you click next, please? And as well as trust, I mean, I would also question the validation of these spreadsheets. And if you Google famous Excel errors, you'll see many. I mean, some of them are really interesting. Some of them include the British Secret Service. So, and these are all, very publicized errors. The one that was probably the most publicized was Fidelity announced a $1.84 billion gain on their Magellan fund, when in fact it should have been a $1.84 billion loss, simply because of a missing sign in Excel. And the the CEO of Magellan actually said, with today's technology, how on earth can this happen? Now, if you take this, and with all the millions of spreadsheets and templates and everything, that's just for the budget. How then do you go about going to the business to do scenario management? It's it's almost impossible to do it on a timely basis. And I asked one of my customers, I asked the CFO, how do you do this? And he just said, I do it manually. I just sit in my office. I do what I think is a different scenario, using some calculations, and that's it. Again, a lack of clarity, very disjointed, no trust. Next slide, please. I used to be on the other side of the fence. I used to be a budget holder, and back then, you created your budget, you submitted your budget. It was either approved or denied. If it was approved, you then spent it. It was a very straightforward, simple road ahead. Things then got less clear, and maybe it was union issues or something happened in the organization. So instead of being able to spend the budget that had just been approved, they may come back and say, you need to reapprove it. There is no possibility of scenario management. What if we can't produce, to sales? What if? There was none of that at all. And now it's gone even further. And if you think about what Doctor Strange said in the Marvel movie Endgame, Iron Man asked him what's the possibility of victory, and he said 14,605,000. Now, obviously, we won't have as many possibilities as that, but we have quite a lot. And if you think about what's happened over the last few years, we've got Ukraine, we've got COVID. Before that, we had Brexit, we had the financial crash. So there's always something we have to prepare for and plan. Next slide, please. So we've determined we do need to do scenario management. It's a fact. With applications today, and there are many, a single platform, perhaps it has machine learning, perhaps it is in memory, perhaps it's, and so on and so on. So there's plenty of products out there that can do this, but you need the ability to create a scenario, then determine what are you going to base that scenario on. is it seeded, i.e. is it last year's actuals, this year to date? Is it a forecast? Or is it zero-based? Are you starting from scratch? Or a combination? And Ron mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, connection across the organization. And this is where FP&A comes in, extended planning and analytics. It's not just about the silo, it's not just about finance, it's about the entire organization, and perhaps not just financial values. Perhaps we want to look at non-financial values as well. Basically anything that's going to enrich the budgeting, the planning and the forecasting. And that includes drivers and perhaps indexation. And this is really where machine learning could come into its own. You can create the scenario, you can apply these assumptions, you can apply machine learning to create this this new scenario. And that allows you to then do the reporting. And once you've done the reporting, unless you can then act on the results, it's pretty much all for nothing. So, and I think it was Guyan that mentioned outcomes. Outcomes are critical. So you get the outcome and you act on that outcome. And I would argue that this should become almost continuous. Once you've done that, you then need to look at the next scenario. Again, that 14 million plus possible futures. Next. And on this last slide, I just want to talk about how we have this split between ERP and FP&A. So the two on the left, this is ERP, or a financial management system. The point is here that this is it's historical. It's happened, right? It's very good at telling you, how to do something now, what you need to do now. But as soon as it's processed, it's history. Whereas the two on the right is now, we're now looking forward. Is it, forecast for the rest of the year? Is it planned for the next 5 years, or is it a simulation? And a couple of quotes from my customers. The first one is, ERP enables us to drive forward on a day-to-day basis, as we've just said. FP&A is about looking forward and planning the next journey, and it could be the next journey of many. And then the one at the bottom, complete budget alignment immediately compared with 2 weeks. And this is really all about speed to those insights. I have another customer quote, and they use the term pivot at speed. So again, to use Guyan's point about outcome, we've got the outcome, we need to be able to pivot at speed to adjust to that outcome. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Ron. Thank you.
Perfect, Stephen. As you were talking, I was envisioning version 64 of my spreadsheet as trying to complete the forecast. So it's really empowering to say, look, as you use technology, you can eliminate a lot of the manual Excel errors. I have many in my past, and help the organization move forward with consistent, reliable information. And even that example, that it's very pointed that you talked about a CFO manually doing the work, and think about the inefficiency there and how we could leverage that amazing skill set in different ways. You talked about acting, and you talked about outcomes, very consistent with Guyan and Vikram. And it's really about decision making, as you said. How do we enable that? And I love this last slide and saying, look forward, not just backward, right? How do you look in the front of the car as opposed to in the rear view mirror? And how do we use those technologies? And even that last quote, complete budget alignment immediately. And even I think about my 4-month process that I talked about earlier, really, really powerful. So as a FP&A group, as an FP&A organization, as around the globe, how do we leverage this mentality? Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Okay, what we're going to do now is I'd love Vikram and Guyan to join me as well. Okay, perfect. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys for, give me a minute or so on your takeaways. What do you take from this? And maybe even one thing that you're going to do as you listen to the other presenters. So Vikram, maybe I'll start with you.
Sorry, Ron, I missed the question.
Yeah, so I just want your key takeaways and potentially one thing you're going to do moving forward as you listen to the panelists.
Absolutely. So I think just having a panel with from such diverse industries is very beneficial for me. Like I mentioned, we're a financial services organization, so sometimes pace of change is different for us. We are risk averse. hearing from Guillaume on the retail side is, it's a very interesting takeaway. You come to think about it, a lot of products, at the end of the day, are driven off similar fundamentals. So for me, the key takeaway is to continue to, push this message down within our organization, within the team, and continue to ensure, where we continue down this path.
Amazing, thank you. How about you, Guyan?
Yeah, a couple of takeaways for me. The first one is, I really appreciate that we spend time to be able to reflect on this, right? So we're all in the day-to-day under pressure. I'm sure all the finance folks that are connected are taking time to learn and reflect on their behavior, and it includes me, the team as well. So first takeaway for me is good to reflect on what we're doing and how can we improve it. I don't think there is a right or wrong, especially in terms of scenario management, but how can we just improve it? That's the number one. The number two is outcome driven. I think there's been alignment there to be, we do this for a purpose. We don't do this for the sake of doing it and trying to do it right. We do this for a purpose. And the third piece for me that has been mentioned is, it makes me reflect. I think we've got many opportunities within my company to do things faster. So the time to do it might be equally as important as the outcome. And it's something that definitely I will take back to think about, how could we find the right balance to somewhat being, yes, agile, but also faster to be able to drive decision even in a more nimble way.
Amazing, thank you. And as you were talking, it reminded me of a CEO I used to work with. He used to always say, never waste a good crisis, right? And we've been through a number of crises. And essentially it's like, how can you learn from it? I love your provocation of, how do we reflect on and say, how do we change existing processes that have been there forever and make a difference? So I really appreciate that. How about you, Steve?
So obviously I'm on the opposite side of the fence to Guyan and Vikram, but the message is still the same. We're trying to get the message across about insights and outcome. Automation is a given. Although, having said that, I watched an interview recently with Elon Musk, and he was complaining about engineers who were automating processes that shouldn't exist in the first place. So yes, automation is great, but I think the insights of the data and the outcome are absolutely key.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful point around, really reflecting and building on Guillaume's point around, is a process absolutely necessary, and can we eliminate the non-value added pieces? And I remember back to my budget example that I referred to, we had like a 215 line Excel spreadsheet as a calendar. And think about how we could say, that's gonna that in itself is painful. How can we think about what's truly adding value, what's driving outcomes, what's helping make business decisions? So absolutely love it. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna go over to the Q&A section, and I'm just reading my questions here. Some wonderful questions sent out. I really appreciate all the participants. And actually, Steve, I'm gonna start with you with a great question here. So what are the technical approaches? So give me a step-by-step towards designing and implementing a high-level advanced automated scenario management. I'll ask you one more time. Wow. There's a lot there. What are the technical approaches?
Good luck, Steve.
Step by step towards designing and implementing a high-level advanced automated scenario management? I think it's a wonderful question.
It is. I would probably take a step back and find out what the business actually needs. And to my point earlier about automation for the sake of it is not the right way to go. But it's about the platform. Do you have the right platform and the right mentality to implement scenario management? Yeah, I think that's. So the mentality piece comes back to the mood that Guyan was mentioning at the beginning.
Okay, so as I reflect on that, so step one, understand, do you have the right mentality, you have the right process? Take me a little further than that. So let's say you said, hey, we've got the organization aligned, the processes seem aligned. What's next?
I mean, then, it's a question of, I'm from the software side. So obviously, from my point of view, it's a question about, selecting the right software. And there's many out there that can do this job, but it has to be, and I think somebody mentioned this earlier, it has to be easy to use. if you make it really difficult, you're not going to get the buy-in from the team that you need. So an easy to use application that does, what has been designed by the business or defined by the business. And once you've got that, then you get into that step-by-step process of, define a scenario, populate the scenario with the data, add any indexation, drivers, machine learning, or assumptions, and so on until you get the outcomes. And then from those outcomes, you may want to look at the insights of those outcomes.
Okay, amazing. No, and I like that. And I was once involved in an implementation where the folks who were helping us, do that. First of all, they provided a ton of change management, a ton of coaching around that way. They talked about leadership has to be fully bought in and leading the charge. You can't expect the lower level analysts, managers. We need to be all moving forward and really moving that along. So I love that answer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Guyan and Vikram maybe to reflect on, we talked about big organization with existing processes. And Guyan in particular, you mentioned, hey, I want to reflect on what we have. Any insights in, hey, how do you, perhaps if you're working in a big organization, step back and potentially initiate some change there? Guyan, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question and not an easy answer. My experience has been that, again, where lies the biggest priority as a business, right? And I think we have a diverse, not only panel, but most likely background of attendees. And I think reflecting on where is the business at from a maturity standpoint should yield where should we put the biggest focus on the strategic side. So is it long-term? Is it positioning? Is it actually very short-term to deliver results? Is it the earnings? Is it something else? And then I would assess the maturity of how we're doing scenario management on that specific challenge. So if it's an earning, as an example, if it's a quarterly release, then I would be like, okay, how are we assessing our ability to manage various scenario on a quarterly basis, rolling forecast for the quarterly basis, and how could we be more agile on that front? But it might be very different for someone else, where that could be, actually, we need to totally shift our business toward a new business model on the digital side for the next 3 years. And then I would ask myself, okay, so what are the key levers and assumption that will have an impact to our business model, our profitability and our sustainability, and how will that impact the way we should start to think about scenario planning? So I would start there, and then I would just look at the process and how we do it and do the old SWOT analysis. Say, okay, what are our strengths? What are our opportunities? What can we do better? With one goal, that is to improve, not to be the best, but just to improve, make it better every day or every month.
I love that. And I love how you first connect to the business needs, right? Say, hey, what are we trying to achieve here? And then you said, let's do the analysis and make the changes. Vikram, what about you from your perspective?
I would agree with everything Guillaume said. I think in my mind, the first starting point always is a current state assessment. You need to know where you are currently before you can determine where you want to go. Then secondly, it's important to have those partnerships with the business. In our case, what was critical for us was to get access to real-time business data. As most of us would know, most financial systems are limited to what's on the GL and do not really bring in some of that volumetric driver-based input you need. So building that pipeline into the business is, or their data sets, is very critical. And finally, as I mentioned, having the people with the data skill sets. I think we have probably done more hiring of data engineers in the last 5 to 6 months than of CAs, at least within my team, or people who are sort of motivated by or driven by data, essentially. So it's having that combination within your team, which is also very helpful.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Vikram. No, I really like that. One more question. So Steve, I'll turn this over to you, and maybe I'll ask the other panelists for their comments. So We have a question here around, hey, what does scenario management mean? How many scenarios are involved? Is it 1? Is it 50? Is it 100? Any guidance there as you think about, what we've have as this provocation on scenario management?
It comes back to, as you mentioned earlier, the black swan events. So, so for example, today you could have because COVID hasn't gone away, so you could have a COVID scenario, you could have a Brexit scenario, you could have a inflation scenario. So it's basically what external pressures your organization is going to come under, and then that drives the scenarios you have to plan for.
Amazing, amazing. I thank you all for that, and really thank the attendees for the great questions. Okay, so we're gonna keep going. And what we want to do now is we really want to first thank you for joining. I think it's fantastic. We've got a couple of amazing webinars that will build on this. So we've got an amazing Dollar General case study, October the 5th, and it's a real case study. They're going to walk through how they got there. We've talked a lot about the journey. This is going to be with a step-by-step. There's another one, the winning formula of harmonizing top-down and bottom-up planning processes. Right? Think about what we talked about. Think about that connection. So that's on October 19th. Really want to thank Unifor. Again, I think lots of thought leadership in here, and it's amazing that we had 57 countries, 396 registrants. Become part of the community, and I think there's amazing cutting edge information being published, right? We talked about the 2022 survey, and you can find it anywhere. So FP&A Trends, you can subscribe to it, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. And in this day and age, it's like, how can we find that one advantage, that one tool, that one angle to move ourselves forward? And last but not least, I really want to thank my panel. So Steve, Vikram, Guyan, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing all the insights and advice. And it's all about us moving forward. And I really want to thank all attendees. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks, everyone.
I would really appreciate if everybody completes the survey.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.